Hello and welcome to Lisa T Creations. I'm the Lisa behind Lisa T Creations, and if you're new here, I welcome you to the channel. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you for coming back. And so today I have a fairly beginner-friendly project to work on today. We are going to make this badge lanyard. My lanyard that I was using broke, so I decided instead of going to get a new one, I would just make one for myself out of some cork and some clear vinyl and a beaded chain. So the first part of this project, I'm going to do just the badge holder itself, and in the second video I'm going to show you how I made the beaded chain. And so it's going to be a two-part project, but if you're not a beader, you can skip that second part and just buy a lanyard to attach this to. But I'm going to make both because I like beading. Beading is my second love. Sewing has become my first. So anyway, let's get started on this project. Okay, let's go over what you're going to need for this project. You're going to need a ruler, and I am using a 6-inch ruler, and this should be sufficient if you've already pre-cut your cork. And you're going to need 2 pieces of cork that measure 4 by 4. And then you're going to need 2 pieces of cork that measure 4 by 5. I am choosing to use the coordinating thread with the color of the cork, but you can use any color that matches your cork, whatever cork you have. And then you're going to need 2 pieces of, I have the paper backing so you can see it a little better. This piece of vinyl measures 2.5 by 3.5, and that gives you a little wiggle room when you put it in the middle. And then you're going to need a marking tool. I'm using one that's heat erasable today, but you can use any one. It's not going to be visible. And then you're going to need a sharp pointed scissors. And then to punch the hole where the grommet goes, you're going to need a puncher or whatever tool you can use to cut that hole in the top of the lanyard or the badge holder. And then you're going to need something to set the grommets with. This came with the kit, so that's what I'm using. And then of course you're going to need your grommet. And so this is it. There's not a whole lot of things that you need for this project. So let's get started actually making the badge holder. Okay, so the first step is to actually cut the hole in the center. So this does create a little waste, but you can use what's left over for another project. So you're just going to turn this around to the back side, and then you want to find the center and mark the center first. And do that on both of them. So this is, since it's 4 by 4, the center on this one is really easy to find. Okay, So now that we've marked the center, the next thing is on the 4x4s, it doesn't matter which one you use. So we want to mark that 2x3 that's going to be the center opening so you can see the badge. So to do that, on one side, line your 1-inch mark up with the center seam, and then mark where that is. And then turn it around and mark that same side, or the opposite side. Now, when you do this side, you got to do 1.5. So line your 1.5 mark up with that center line and mark it. And then you're going to turn it around and do the same thing. So when you're finished, this line right here will be your 2x3 square in the middle. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cut this one. I just bend it over just a little bit and clip a hole in the line. You can use a rotary cutter with this, but I'm not really good with using the rotary cutter, so I just cut on the line. So you're going to cut out the square in the middle. Alright, so that's what it should look like when you're finished. Now I'm going to do the other one off camera, and then I'll be back to show you how to cut the 4x5. Okay, so to mark the 4x5 inch, this one has to be more precise. And so what we're going to do is still find the center. But first we got to mark 1 inch down from where the top is going to be. And then we're going to mark the center of the 4-inch square. So put your 2-inch line on the line you just marked. And then on this side it doesn't really matter. You can do 2 inches all along the outside. Oops, I got out of the frame, sorry. So when you're done with that part, it should look like this. And now we're going to do the same thing to mark the center square on this one, but in this one it does matter. So for the center seam that going up and down, it's going to be 1 inch this way and 1 inch this way. So let me mark that right fast. Okay, and so now we're gonna mark the 3-inch part. So we're gonna flip it around this way and put it the 1.5 on that center line. And then do the same on the other side. And that's going to leave our center square right there, and it'll be centered when we put this part on top of it. So there's one more step that you have to do for the top where we marked. So there's one more spot that we need to trim, and we need to, because we're going to round this off at the top, so we need to mark that line on the 1-inch part that we marked. We need to mark the lines to cut that off. So you want to line the edge of your ruler up from this line to this line, and just go ahead and mark that. And do the same thing on this side. So your marking should look like this. Now what I'm going to do is go in and cut the center square out and trim these off. And I'm going to do that to both of these off. Okay, so when you're finished, your 4x5 pieces should look a little bit like this, or should look like this. And then now we're going to start assembling the badge holder. And so I'm going to start with the 4-inch and make sure the 3 inches, well, actually it doesn't really matter because you'll be able to see one way or another how it goes. So now we're going to need these pieces of clear vinyl. And so because this is cork and I can't pin it, what I'm going to use, and I forgot to say this in the supplies list, what I'm going to use is some double-sided tape, and I usually just put it on the long side of these. So just put a piece of that double-sided tape on each of the long sides. And this is going to help hold the vinyl in place while we're sewing it. But it's always tricky for me to get that started without pulling the whole thing off. And let me try this end. Alright, finally. That side went way smoother. Okay, so once you have your double-sided tape in, you're going to want to center your piece of vinyl and match the dimensions there. And then and now that piece of vinyl is attached to the cork and it's not going to go anywhere. So the next step is to put the other piece of cork on top of it, and we want to match up the inside of the square more than the outside, because we're going to trim the outside once we have that vinyl sewn in place. So I'm just going to use some clips to clip to hold it in place where it doesn't move while we're sewing it. And then the next step is going to be to sew 1/8 of an inch around this inside seam, and that's going to lock that piece of vinyl in place and create a nice detail. And then we're also going to sew 1/8 of an inch down this direction on this side. Whichever side is you want to be the top, you're going to sew 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And so you're going to do the same thing with the 4 by 5 inch pieces. You're going to match the inside and then sew 1/8 of an inch around this interior. And we're going to wait till after we trim this to sew along the top of the border. And we're also, once we trim it, we're going to round these corners off. And so for right now, I'm going to do the insides off camera. Okay, to sew these, I'm going to sew about 1/8 of an inch around the inside edge to lock the clear vinyl in place. Now I have changed my stitch length to a 3.0, and I did change my presser foot so I could use the edge of that foot as my guide. And I want to put the edge of the presser foot, and I'm not sure if you can see that, but the edge of this is matched up to the edge of the gap in between there, so I can make sure I'm sewing consistent all the way around. Okay, because I believe in transparency here. So this thread that I use is really thick, and it is 100% cotton. Now I've been told that polyester works better on cork, and so I'm going to have to redo this because the front side, while the front side looks okay, the back side looks like a tangled rat's nest mess. And I believe part of the reason why is because this thread is so thick and it just doesn't go well with cork. So I'm going to change my thread and I'm going to recut these pieces and we're going to try this again. Okay, I'm going to do that one off camera. Instead, I did change my thread out to something similar in a polyester thread, and it's thinner thread. So hopefully this will work better. Do keep in mind that sometimes when you're using the double-sided tape, if you are sewing through that tape, it can sometimes gum up your needles. So be aware of that, because that is one potential problem. But this is feeling much better already. Okay, and there you have it. Much better. The polyester thread worked much better than the thinner thread, because that was a very thick thread. I had a hard time getting it through the needle. So anyway, this is what it looks like when you have it sewed. And so I'm gonna fix my 4x4 square, and I will meet you back here to go on to the next step. Okay, so when you have the insides all sewn together, this is about what they're gonna look like. Now, if you can see that, you will see that the edges don't quite line up, no matter how hard I try. Now, if you're a better sewist and you can get these all to line up, and you cut better than me, you can cut them down to size. But I have to do some trimming. So this top and bottom parts of this is roughly a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to equal it out all the way around. And to do that, I'm going to take my handy dandy ruler and line it up with the inside seam. And use my rotary cutter to cut that off. So you are, like I said, you are going to have a little bit of scraps. I don't know if you can figure if these might be good for some tabs, so you might want to save those. I'm going to save them for tabs. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. And now, if there's anything top to bottom that needs a little bit of trimming, now would be a good time to do this, because the next step we're going to sew these together. But you're going to follow that same procedure on this side and cut it off 1/2 inch, cut it down. You want to leave a 1/2 inch right there, line your 1/2 inch mark with that inside seam. Now with this side, I did have some where they're not quite even. I think I'm going to leave it that way though, because we're going to put it together like this, and you won't be able to see that once it's together. At this time, you can either round these corners off, or you can just leave it like that. I'm gonna round the corners off with my scissors. Okay, so when you're done trimming these, the small one is going to be 3 by 4, and then the larger one is going to be 3 by 5. Wait, yeah, it's going to be 3 by 5. And so before we sew these together, though, we have to do some finish work so it doesn't come apart. And you need to decide on your 3 by 4 one which side's going to be the top, and then you're going to top stitch right across the top. So I'm going to do that right fast. Bring my sewing machine forward. So, and just want us to sew about 1/8 of an inch across the top of that. And what this does is seal that top so those two pieces don't come apart when you're putting your badge inside, and we want to seal that closed. So the next step is we are going to sew these together. So we want to match up the edges and clip these in place. And then we are going to put 2 seams in here. First, we are going to sew 1/8 of an inch all the way around the outside, and then we're going to go over a little ways, and then we're going to sew another seam. Now, if it's easier for you to mark this with erasable ink, then go ahead and do that. Also, do not sew across this top edge. You're going to leave that open, but you are going to sew all the way around the points. Just go real slow when you're going around those circles or the curves, and that way you still get your seam nice and straight. Okay, so I'm getting ready to sew these. So I'm going to try to use the edge of my presser foot to sew these lines straight. So I am going to move my needle all the way over to the right, and then I have adjusted my stitch length to 3.0. And now that should give me just about 1/8 of an inch. Now I'm gonna just trim my threads. And so if these sides are not even, which some of them obviously aren't, so the next step is to trim off and even all of these up. So I'm going to do that part off camera. The last step to finish this is to put the grommet in the top, and for that you're of course going to need the grommet parts. There's two parts to this particular style of grommet. There's the top that has the larger flashing, and then the bottom that has the smaller. And then this is what the tool looks like. You use this with a hammer. And then to cut the hole, I'm using this leather working tool to make the hole. So you can eyeball this if you want to, or if you want to get more exact, you want to go 1¼ inches over, and about ½ inch down, and that will pretty much center that in the middle. And then you're just going to hammer it. And of course, I didn't go all the way through. Okay. I'm going to finish this up with the scissors. It's just a little bit awkward to do in front of the camera, but when you're finished, you should have a nice hole in the middle. And I'm sorry, some of that, I didn't realize some of that was off camera. But once you're finished, you should have this nice hole. And this grommet should go right through that hole. And push it down on the other side to make sure all the flashing is out of it. And then put the back on it. And then I'm going to put it, oops, I just put the back on there already. And then you're going to hammer it again. Why is this stuck? Okay, so I did it backwards. Okay, there's your grommet. And now your badge holder is completed.